Welcome to Think Fitness Life podcast, mindset, exercise, and nutrition. We are three personal trainers and health coaches dedicated to providing information in these three realms to promote longevity. I, Matt Gluckman, started this podcast with the help from my co-hosts Eric Menchie and Mike Urso over there in Boston, Massachusetts. I've been working one-on-one with individuals in this industry for the past 4 years, and I'm proud to have co-hosts who have a combined total of 15, 20 years in the industry, along with specialty certifications, master's degrees, yada, da, da, da. So take a listen as we discuss health with respect to exercise, psychology, and lifestyle. We hope we can help guide people along their journey as they continue to strengthen their body, mind, and spirit. And this week, we will be discussing energy systems. After we go through a little bit of some news, some stuff that we found in the news. And yeah, Mike, Eric, do you guys have any articles you want to discuss?
I do not have anything news breaking today, unfortunately.
Yeah. The only thing I came across, I can throw this in the ring. I came across it today, and it talked about the science behind complaining, and most of it had to deal with what we've talked about on our meditation podcast, which was like neuroplasticity and neurons that fire together, wire together, and the whole complaining is like this whole feedback loop that just happens, and people don't mean to do it or want to do it. It's just they're conditioned to do it, and they're conditioned to do it to people, like to innocent bystanders. Did you ever have like somebody who just starts complaining to you about something, and you're just like, I can care less right now about this, right? Like they like habitual complainers have a tendency to just barge in and shamelessly complain. Like they feel the need to say it to other people, right? And unsolicited. And as just the science was funny, it talked about everything we've talked about, which is, you've got to change your habit, you've got to change your pattern. It's all about, neuroplasticity. And so you can untrain, or I should say, undo those habits just as easy as to create those habits. But again, they went to, and the conclusion was that meditation or some sort of mindfulness practice would be kind of the antidote to solving your complaining problem if you find yourself doing that, and you want to put a stop to it for everyone else's sake, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of how we talked about it before, about how when you get a thought and it's something that you have to do and you put it off, you get better. It's like a strength. You get better at that reflex of putting it off and procrastinating. So by doing something as simple as setting your alarm and telling yourself that as soon as you hear that alarm, you're going to get right out of bed, you've now broken that pattern of procrastinating.
Don't be a complainer.
Right. Don't be, yeah, seriously.
It literally can be contagious for people. Well, have you ever been in a room and someone starts complaining, and all of a sudden it's like three more people start complaining, and it's before you know it, it's literally goes around the room, and it's contagious because it's that you set that thought and that mind in someone's brain, and it's a condition to like just go with what your surrounding people are doing.
Yeah, and negative people are almost always complainers, right? Like without fail. And they
And the best thing you can do is leave the room, leave the situation.
Well, that's it, because they're complainers. They're not satisfied to keep their thoughts and feelings to themselves. They're looking for unwilling participants to vent, right?
I mean, I fell into that category. I remember bitching in the break room, but I remember also transitioning to a couple months in and being like, nope, I just gotta check my shit at the door. I come in and I do my thing. And then I got better at like recognizing when someone was having a pity party and not giving in to that urge to want to jump on the bandwagon and then just turn around and leave the room.
Yeah. The article was interesting because it talked about there are like three different groups that essentially they fall into. One was attention seeking complainer, the other one was a chronic complainer, Those are people who are like in a constant state of complaint. And then low EQ complainers, so people who are just aren't very in tune with emotional intelligence. And I thought that was really interesting because I can definitely see people who fall into all those categories. Like I've met attention seeking complainers. I definitely have met chronic complainers before, and I try to avoid them like the plague. But then there are also people who are just, they're not very socially inept, and they have like low EQ, and they just, they don't even know, they can't even recognize the people's expressions, like when they're like all over their face, like I don't care right now, or go tell somebody else your problems, right? Or you know what I mean?
They can't even recognize what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting that you could like categorize complainers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've definitely met some people like that. Yeah. Or like, I gotta go. I gotta go. Sorry, I'll talk to you later. And they're like literally following you. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, the whole article was about meditation and mindfulness, and talking about the research and how the research essentially shows that people who practice meditation and mindfulness are display much more positive emotions on a daily basis than those who don't. I mean, and anyone who wants to try to like, you know, go against that, I mean, I'm sorry, but there is so much research out there at this point about meditation and the benefits, like of what it does. We talked about it in that podcast, but like it's just like if there was a pill out there that a drug company made that lowered your blood pressure, lowered your stress, was able to like increase your immunity, um, increase your ability to react or not react to emotional events, like how much would you pay for that? You'd pay a lot for something like that, yet it's free, and yet people still won't do it. Most people still won't do it. um,
well, there's a drug that um, it's like an enzyme that will lengthen the telomeres, the chromosomes of the telomeres. So, I mean, you're kind of basically,
are you saying that enzyme is produced or active when you're meditating, or just that there's actually a drug that you have to is it exogenously take?
yeah, right, right. Well, they've produced a drug that you can you can get that will lengthen your telomeres. So it's like literally everything you just said is that there are drugs to do all that. There are drugs to make you happier, lower your stress, lengthen your telomeres. Like it's a shame that there are so many drugs that can start to touch the benefits of meditation but are nowhere near the true benefits of long-term meditation practice. And it takes people to get to see this science and read this science before they say, "Oh, that might be a good idea." Even though meditation has been around since before the first century, like, maybe it's a good idea. I should try this out.
But we know the science. We've seen it in all the research with the placebo effects. Well, I mean, people don't pay attention to it, of course, except us, if because we're looking for it. But all the research shows that the placebo effect is real. Like people think they're taking a drug. They think they're taking a drug, and their brain is actually yeah, it's actually producing the chemicals that are used to heal the exact thing that they're trying to heal. Like their brain makes it because they think it is just by thinking. Like it literally turns mind energy into matter and produces something.
If you believe it enough, right? Just by thinking it, right? And you think that would be enough for people to be like, "Holy shit, we got to tap into this some more."
It's amazing. It's really hard because just like anything, it's just like dragging yourself to the gym. It's just like making the right choices to eat healthy, or to cook your meal versus stop at the drive-through. Everyone wants something convenient, and meditation is not convenient. It's time consuming. It's really not, because you should start small, because just that small little sliver of like 5 minutes every morning could just pay dividends over time. But it's the ritual one. It's the discipline. It's the discipline of it, though. You people just don't have the discipline or the ability to. They try to bite off too much at once, versus like you just said, do it for 5 minutes once a week. Start there, and it's like Dan John, he says like people who don't floss, because he's big on flossing, and he's like, start with one tooth. He's like, promise yourself that you will floss one tooth. Like, and if you can floss one tooth, it takes you like 1 second to floss one tooth, and guaranteed you will be flossing more teeth if you just start flossing that one tooth. But it's all about starting with, like, give yourself the smallest target possible. Going back to our goal setting podcast, you can go back to that one. And we lay it all out there, but that's really what it's about, starting small. And it's unfortunate that people are missing all the advantages that come from meditation. And it spirals into complaining about your life. And people who complain are typically people who can actually do something about it, but just don't want to take action, right? So it's a pain. You kind of have to know your environment, and if you don't want to go down in a ball of flames with those people, and you have to change the people you hang out with, and change your environment to people who are doing the things that you wish you were doing, and let a little bit rub off on you. I mean, we know that, we talked about it, the fields of energy that are around us. Just being, like we said, going into a room with a bunch of complainers, you may end up starting to complain yourself, just through osmosis. You know what I mean? But if you go to a place where people are being pleasant or telling jokes or having a good time, and enjoying life, that's going to rub off on you too. So, really just pay attention to that environment. It's crazy. Get away from those people.
Yeah, even 5-10 minutes once a week. It's just a practice that you just gotta keep doing. Can we just talk about meditation again, or do we gotta go into energy systems? Yeah, well, yeah, we'll have to. We'll have to. Um, all right. Well, before we fall down the rabbit hole, let's step into some energy systems. I just kind of want to briefly um, just define it for people in a really simple way. That's the only way I can do things. So you have three primary energy systems. You have aerobic glycolysis, which is a much slower rate of producing ATP and requires oxygen. And that's going to be something for like your marathon runner or anything you're doing really above 3 minutes. Then there's anaerobic glycolysis, and that's more intermediate, larger bursts for extended periods, like 30 seconds to 3 minutes. And that might be like running up a hill or something like that. And both of those systems are going to pull energy from carbohydrates. Aerobic glycolysis is going to pull more energy from fats than anaerobic glycolysis. And then your phosphagen system is like rapid, ready to use energy that's already stored in our muscle. And it's going to be for um, anything from 1 to 30 seconds. So you're thinking about like,
Power. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like you're a power clean or a submaximal deadlift, submaximal squat, or just a sprint.
Or Juggernaut running through a brick wall. Like, that's, you know what? So no, you know what? The Flash would be. That's what I would want. He is like straight up phosphagen system, but like underlying aerobic. He's like straight up aerobic power, right? He can go like super long distances at like top speed. That's a lot of horsepower and a lot of fuel economy, right? That's the ultimate.
Yeah, he definitely has a really strong phosphagen system.
We'll do a little analysis at the end where we talk about superheroes and which predominant energy system they use.
His phosphagen system is probably like every other human's anaerobic glycolysis system. Superheroes again? I like that. I like that 'cause I'm a big superhero nerd. Um, but two other ones I want to mention are you have your Cori cycle and then your Cahill cycle, Cahill. And these are kind of two systems that are working in the background that are taking byproducts from energy expended, and it kind of reestablishes it as ATP to supply more energy. Um, so I thought that was pretty interesting. I've only recently learned about the Cori cycle, and then I just doing some research for this podcast learned about the Cahill cycle. So I'm sure there's a couple more out there that are working in the background. But the main thing with these two is that they're both very inefficient. The Cahill cycle way more inefficient than the Cori cycle because it requires more energy to resupply, you know, different elements onto the chain to make it ATP again. But it's still a lower rate of basically your body's own recycling system. So go ahead and tell me a little bit about how this lines up into um, periodization and making a program so that I can get better at these systems.
What do you want to get better at? Do you want to be marathons, sprinting?
I want to be like the juggernaut for 26.2 miles.
Might never happen.
No, yeah, it won't happen.
You know what? So no, you know what? The Flash would be that's what I would want. He is like straight up phosphagen system, but like a underlying aerobic. He's like straight up aerobic power, right? He can go like super long distances at like top speed. That's a lot of horsepower and a lot of fuel economy, right? That's the ultimate engine.
But it's almost like that's almost like his aerobic glycolysis because he's never exhausted. His phosphagen system would send him, yeah, it would send him like back in time.
That's true. Yeah, what would his phosphagen system look like? Warp speed.
He defies all the energy system rules. Just put into one and he just like functions.
So of course Mike would want to be him.
No, well, let me talk about this. So, I think like if we were gonna say how does it fit into periodization? So like where do we start? Which energy system do we train first? I don't think it matters what you're training for. If you're training for baseball, if you're training for mixed martial arts, if you're training for a javelin throw, which is or a 100-meter sprint. I think you still have to have an underlying aerobic system development built on that. So if we were imagining a pyramid and the base is the foundation, that should be your aerobic system. On top of that should be your anaerobic or glycolytic system, and then on top of that, at the peak, should be your phosphagen system, your creatine phosphate system, and that's kind of like the order in which I would want to train them from a periodization standpoint. Now, obviously, there's special cases and very specific type of athletes and skills, and when we're talking about people at the professional level, they may require a different process to get there. But for the general person who, let's say, the general gym goer who just wants to be able to work harder, be able to perform better, I would say aerobic first because um, the goal, like let's take our clients for example. The goal when we're trying to work with a client and to get them to do, obviously the goal is to get them to be able to do more work, right? And if they can't even make it through a 60-minute training session without getting completely gassed out, and they don't have, because obviously we talked about anything over 3 minutes is aerobic. So every 60-minute training session or workout that somebody does is always you're working aerobic. Like aerobic system is your underlying system that entire time. And so yes, are you dipping out into, depending if you're doing Olympic lifts, are you doing ATPCP? Of course you are. Or if you're doing 5 rep max on deadlift, are you doing anaerobic stuff? Yeah, absolutely you are. But you do need to have that aerobic base built, and that's for recovery reasons. It's so that you can carry metabolic waste product out of, so when you are training the anaerobic system, it's more efficient and you can deliver energy better to your anaerobic system because you can carry out metabolic waste product. That doesn't happen very good without building your aerobic system. And that's a really important part to remember. But the aerobic system, yeah, that should be kind of the first place you start. I'll
Yeah, like no. Okay, so now, how would you start? Say that I haven't been working out. I haven't been working out for years, and I noticed that I wanted to go back in and just start doing some movement and push-ups and pull-ups and air squats. But as soon as after one set, like I've practiced my breathing, I've mastered that part of it. But I've noticed that like right after a little circuit of pull-ups, push-ups, and air squats, I was exhausted and had to wait like a couple more minutes before the next round. So how would I go about training my aerobic system um, from that point?
Do another circuit, rest, recover, do another one. I think a lot of people. That's a great question. I think a lot of people get confused of like, oh, I should go on a bike and do it. Well, you could go on a bike and do 30 to 60 minutes of aerobic and build the system. But then if you go do that push up, pull up, whatever else you did, you're still not going to be efficient at those exercises. And I think that's where people start to think like, if I train aerobic system on a machine, that's going to get me good at doing circuit training with exercise. And how I look at it is like, it's how well you can manage fatigue and manage like basically your system trying to fight and maintain balance, aka the homeostasis, while you putting a stimulus against it. So I would say if you're doing that circuit, rest 2 to 3 minutes or 5 minutes, do it again, but keep that heart rate at a sustained rate, and then you're going to get a training effect. How does that answer make sense for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a really good point. And so then what you would do is for the next week, would you just like shorten the rest period?
For phases, I usually like about 2 to 4 weeks for like training a system just to get comfortable with it, because I think if you jump out of that too quick, you might see they might struggle a bit, but are you really developing it efficiently enough to move on to, can I cut the rest down? Now, if you,
Like you have to give your body some time under the same stimulus for it to adapt to it.
yeah, now say you had a heart rate on and you did it the first week and you're huffing and puffing, you're at 165. And the second week you came back, did the same thing, same timing, and you're at like 135, then I'd say, hey, you can jump up because we need the heart rate a little higher. But most people you see off the bat aren't gonna really see that or get that effect for the first week. It's gonna take a couple times to really set in and get the body adapted to that new set point.
So what you're saying is that you couldn't just merely get better if you just did WODs every day.
Better at what? Like energy system? Yeah.
Better at your better at your aerobic energy system, your aerobic glycolysis, and your recovery periods and stuff like that.
You could. I think it depends on where you enter in that type of workout. Like if you don't have an aerobics base built going into that, then you'll build it, but you won't build it as fast as you could because your aerobic base was better, because a lot of the WODs are mostly anaerobic based. If your aerobic base was better, then you would be able to buffer all of those byproducts a lot faster, and you'd be able to recover faster. You'd be able to do more work. And again, if you can remove waste product faster, that means your body can push harder. It means you can do more work. And the whole goal is to be able to get your body to do more work, because that's what energy is, being able to produce more energy. But I think the question too you're asking a little bit is like, how do we measure to see if what we're doing is making us better, right? That's part of the question too, which is like, if we have a deconditioned person who's just going through like push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, squats, and they're getting gassed out and they need to sit down for 5 minutes, then I'm probably doing too much at that point. If that person's gassing out that quickly, I want to scale it back a little bit. And what I'm going to do with somebody is, here's a very simple way to measure how somebody's aerobic system is improving is, we already know that anything more than 3 minutes is aerobic. So what we want to do is we want to pick a time frame that we can get a good amount of work done. We can move through a bunch of different movement patterns, because this is somebody who's just focused on building their maybe aerobic system through resistance training, let's say, and not going out on the bike or going out for a run, but we want to do it via a gym workout. I'm probably going to do like a 20 after a good warm up, maybe a 20 or 30-minute density workout where I pick 5 or 6 movement patterns, basic movement patterns like a hinge, push, pull, all the stuff we talked about in our programming. And then I'm going to set the timer for, let's say 30 minutes. And I want that person doing sub-maximal loads, way under, like if they're 12 rep 12 rep max loads, I'm having them do like, 8 to 10 reps, like way under, till exhaustion. And I'm just having them, keep moving, minimal rest. How many rounds of these 5 exercises can you get through in 30 minutes? Oh, great. You got through 7 rounds this week. We're going to try the same workout again next Monday. And next week, we're going to see how many rounds you can get through. And if they get through more rounds with the same exercises, with the same weight, and they don't need to rest as much, I know that their aerobic system is improving. I don't have to measure heart rate. I don't have to measure anything. All I've got to look at how much more work were they able to output in that same time frame using the same exact loads. That's how I know my aerobic system is improving.
Yeah, I'd say that's going to be one of the best ways. And I do it with a little different circuits, but I mean, you can use all kinds of circuits. But I think for people listening, that would be the best way to measure how your energy output is going and how efficient you are.
And I think one thing I want to clarify is just kind of going back to what you're saying about having an aerobic base already established. Maybe you played a bunch of sports growing up, or maybe you've been in and out of the gym, and for whatever reason you haven't been in it recently in the past couple of years. But if you're somebody who um, didn't have an aerobic base, it wasn't very active as a child, maybe never really got into a consistent exercise routine, but you want to start making changes in that beginning part, it's going to be very crucial to stick to a regimented program so that your body can establish that base versus just doing something like just going in for a workout and you feeling like, oh, I did 3 workouts this week, I'm good. Like, well, no, you should probably be more on a regimented program, especially since you are starting from square one. Wouldn't you agree?
A lot of people, like Mike was saying, a lot of people will confuse exercise programs or confuse the aerobic block capacity or building of the system, as you want to call it, as just like, I need to run long, slow, and fast. But then once you get to like Mike's workout, they could do that for 4 weeks and be like, hey, I'm aerobically good, I'm in shape. They could get to Mike's workout and just be slammed because Mike's now taking all the energy systems and metabolic processes and just like upturning them and making the body be like, hey, this is where I need you to really work. And then I think that's where people really get like backed into a wall and they're like, well, I run and I'll do all this work, but like, how come I'm like sucking wind right now? And that's the real extent that I view that you really want to get the aerobic system down. So if I tell you to go do 30-30 sprints, that you can be able to last that and not feel like death.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the residual training effect scale? You may be. Let me explain it. So essentially, like all the different qualities of like phases we're talking about here, like strength, aerobic endurance, strength endurance, speed. They all have a residual effect on when you. So, like, say you cease training one of those specific things, they all have a residual effect on how long you'll keep those changes in the body until they start to I don't want to say evaporate, but they start to leave your system, right? So aerobic endurance is got a long residual effect. It's about 30 days plus or minus 5 days. Strength has about the same, about 30 days plus or minus. Speed has only 5 days of residual effect, plus or minus 3 days. So what that basically means is like you can keep your aerobic endurance for a good time even after you're done training aerobic endurance. And this is why like we didn't I don't know if we got into the block training and periodization, but this is why you can continue to do aerobic training even if you're a power athlete up until a couple of weeks before your event, because you'll still maintain your aerobic ability, but then you can get more specific in training for speed and power right before your event, because the residual effect for those speed and power is a lot lower, meaning you're not going to maintain it at that level beyond when you cease training it. And I just think that's a really interesting thing to point out here too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to make sure I link that in the show notes. And it was just the residual training effect. He said at the lowest, it's like 5 days.
Yeah, so at for speed and power, yeah, maximal speed, maximal power.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it makes sense why, when you're making a program for somebody like who is trying to compete professionally, why you're almost kind of ramping them up there, and like kind of like that last phase is um, almost submaximal, so that you're not destroying anything, but that they're already physically prepared for those maximal loads.
It's a quick turnaround too. And I think on the premise of that, and you mentioning the pyramid, have you guys ever looked at the pyramid of, in the case of that's how you should be developing the energy systems at all?
Yes, yeah.
More just looking at the pyramid from like, all right, the base is aerobic, and then you have glycolytic, and then your phosphagen system. But I've read a lot and heard a lot about training that way. Like the majority should be aerobic. You should tap into glycolytic, and then very so often you should go creatine phosphate and like sprints and stuff like that. But you shouldn't linger on the top 2 tiers. That bottom tier is the most important one to develop over long time.
Yeah, 80-20 rule. 80-20 rule. I think Pareto principle here for sure. Like 80% of your time should be spent doing aerobic work and only 20% maybe doing your specific skill work, whatever. And Ben Greenfield, actually, who we were talking about before we started recording here, he his book Beyond Training. I don't know if either of you guys have read that. I read it, I don't even know, 5-6 years ago. He talks about that even himself when he's doing like training for triathlons, like endurance events. Most of his training is not done anywhere near competition pace. Most of his training is all done like zone two, like 80% of his workouts. Like if he's doing 5 or 6 workouts a week, 4 or 5 of those are done like more aerobic or like zone two, pure oxidative system, and the other ones are where he does a little bit more higher intense work. But he's never really getting even close to competition. Maybe with some of the shorter burst power stuff, but most of the work, the 80%, is done on the aerobic system and developing the aerobic system.
Yeah, that's key because I think I see a lot of marathon trainers and runners. They're pushing the limit of like paces and race pace, and which is good.
When you burn out in your training, yeah.
Exactly. If you stay there too long, like you're not letting your aerobic system develop maximally to really help shuttle and clear and basically resynthesize ATP to help you sustain output longer.
Well, you're burning too much sugar. You're just not getting efficient at fat. Using fat for fuel. You're kind of like you're teetering on that like anaerobic threshold too much, right? And so your body's just not getting really efficient in that like zone two. There's a lot of people, you guys must know people like either clients, former clients, or just people who go for like a 5K run. I had a client who does like, yeah, I do a 5K run every week. He's like, he's always in like zone 3 or 4 doing it. So he's going way too fast. And he's like, I'm not getting any faster. I'm not burning any, like I'm not losing any weight around my stomach. And I'm like, yeah, because you're pretty much in no man's land. You're not really, like, you have to slow down to be able to speed up. And it doesn't really register with people. They think, well, if I just go harder and I just really push myself and I'm exhausted after I'm done and I'm sweating real heavy, well then I must have done something to like make myself faster or help me burn calories or lose fat, when it's actually not the truth. Like you do have to take a step back and slow down and get more fat adaptive, and develop that aerobic system right near your top end of your aerobic system, like right underneath that anaerobic threshold. Develop it there, and then do workouts that tap into it, maybe your intervals, but do those 5Ks. 5Ks typically, at least for the layperson, at least 30 minutes. Like if you're going to run 30 minutes, you should not be running that entire time in zone 3, 4. You know, like you're just asking for an injury.
And it's if you're running glycolytic system like over and over again, and your aerobic system's trying to keep up, but it's just there's going to be a point where you're literally not going to be able to shuttle anything quicker or turn anything over more. So it's you're wasting.
Yeah. And guess what else? As soon as you're done with that workout, because all you did was burn sugar the entire time, all your body's going to want to do is devour sugar all day. It's like, oh God, like I'm starved for it because you just torched a bunch of sugar in your body, and it's like, well, you need to feed me more because that's what you're going to use when you're working out. So so your body's smart; it's going to crave it, and that's another thing too that I think a lot of people don't realize is if you can work your aerobic system, you actually can help like lower cravings because your body gets more fat adapted. It doesn't need to replenish that glucose so readily right after a workout because you've been burning mostly fat. And that's probably a point that people miss at times.
Once you put in the glucose, say after a 5K all out, you know that that GLUT4 receptor is going to lock that glucose molecule into the cell and just basically wait to the next time it does that. So when they do that, these people just are locking glucose into the cell over and over again, which isn't a bad thing. But I think if you start overeating or taking in crap as food, this becomes a problem because your body's constantly locking this in and be like, hey, I need this for later.
Right, and that's the only physical activity that they're doing is that 60 minutes a day, and then they're sitting at a desk for 8 hours. Of course, you're not gonna that glucose is just gonna sit there. Like glucose is only burnt if you're doing something high intensity and more physically kind of strenuous.
And then say they stop it, and then that changes. And I think a lot of people, they'll overdo it every single day. I'm not saying training hard every day is bad, but I think they don't train the right energy systems every day. So then they become metabolically deficient using other substrates, and it just becomes this glycolytic glucose cycle that people try to kick. And then say these people like try to come off that, and they're still high intensity, but they're using a lot of fats, and they're like, I feel like garbage. Well, it's because your body doesn't know how to burn fats efficiently to create energy to sustain your output. Like you're just relying on one pathway. You got to have the adaptability, and I think a lot of people don't enough, or they don't dip into systems that they need to train.
So is it like what came first, like the chicken or the egg, right? Like what came first, the system so dependent on glucose or the diet focused around carbs and glucose?
We'll never know.
Maybe the system. I mean, the system's in place and adapted around it. It's just one of those things that's like,
So back to kind of childhood, back to parenting.
It's an environmental thing, I think. The environment shapes the organism.
Is that really why you brought that article up about complaining, Mike? Did you present it to your children?
It's got nothing to do with being a parent. It's got nothing to do with that.
What do you mean? About our environment changing the way that our bodies would need sugar?
generations and generations ago.
Well, all I'm saying is if I was a child and I was given cereals and yogurts and applesauce and candy and my body.
No, this is way past that. We're talking thousands of years ago for this one. We're we're back in like way back there where it's like, how the hell did
knew that knew that as its familiar energy source, and I never really trained my aerobic system, I never got fat adaptive, then I would fall into that category.
Oh yeah. Well, you see kids. I mean, if you're around kids at all, they ride the carb coaster all day. They go from a
But I see what you mean though, that it's bigger than that. It's more than just this generation. It's humans as a whole.
right epigenetics. The environment turns on those genes and turns them off. So
But you can reshape them in the way that you want.
absolutely, and the mind can do that. Click over to our meditate medication. We're gonna have to do a medication podcast now. Our meditation podcast. Um, yeah, it'll be meditation versus medic. We should actually do a medication versus meditation podcast. That'd be a good one.
Our our medication podcast will be go listen to our meditation. Well, I know you want to do a supplement podcast. We could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but what we're talking about like periodization, right? And with energy systems, and I think like obviously most people who are deconditioned who are just starting an exercise program, they're going to start in a foundation phase, right? Almost all the time. And the foundation phase consists of, you know, endurance and then general strength. That's all I'm focusing on with that person. That may be months where all I'm doing is back and forth between building endurance, their aerobic capacity, and then focused on throwing in a little bit of anaerobic work to build up their general strength. Right. And then after foundation, that's when you can start to get into more performance based stuff. So then you've got that person, they built that nice, pyramid, like the base of the pyramid with their foundation. Right now, we can, on top of that, we can focus on performance. And so, what do we have there? We have a lot more anaerobic work, maybe some of that alactic stuff. So, we can do, max strength. We can now throw some power, med ball throws, box jumps, whatever you want to do, some speed work, maybe some sprints, some ladder drills, right? We can do that because we now have built that foundation of aerobic capacity and general strength. So, our body can now handle the energy and the recovery and the removal of those waste products to shuttle in more energy. But now we can also put more force on the system because we've anaerobically developed ourselves and developed our general strength. So now we're able to now handle power and speed. And so then now once we've developed speed and power, we get to that peak of that pyramid, which is our skill. And so with skill, we're talking about combining things like strength endurance or power endurance or speed endurance. So this would be like, power endurance would be something like, kettlebell swings, like, 10 kettlebell swings on the minute for, let's say, 20 minutes. So you're doing, whatever, what is that, 200 kettlebell swings? That's a lot of kettlebell swings. Damn. But like that's essentially like power endurance, something along the lines of that. Soccer is power endurance. Sprint, jog. So all the what we're talking about is like we have to follow the structure of the pyramid when we're talking about periodization. Like we can't take a layperson and then just start doing 10 kettlebell swings, yeah, on the minute for 10 minutes, or sprints with that person. Like what's going to happen is exactly what we said before. They're going to be sitting down on the bench and be like, all right, I can't even make it through the first 20 minutes of this workout because I don't have an aerobic system to help get me through it. So you kind of have to follow this order. And I don't know, Mike Boyle has been out there to kind of say that they don't do a lot of aerobic work and they don't focus on it. But I don't know. They're running in 60 to 75-minute training sessions. I mean, how are you not doing aerobic work if you're working out for that long?
They're definitely tapping into your aerobic system. Yeah.
We're not going to train aerobic specifically.
Well, I think his way is like, if we can get it in a workout in a circuit, like I don't need to focus on.
He's just saying we're not going to go and we're not going to go ride a bike for 45 minutes purely to focus on aerobic. We're going to get our aerobics training through our workout process. And I agree with that. And I think that's the most efficient. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's more, it's a law of specificity.
Specific to what they're going to be doing. Exactly.
Exactly. Right.
Exactly. You can't be good at running a marathon if you just sit on a elliptical all day.
Unless that person's a triathlete. Exactly. That's the person I do want out there running, for 60 minutes, for 2 hours. Yeah, absolutely.
It actually kind of back to the pyramid. Reminds me of listening to Zach Bitters on Joe Rogan's podcast, who holds the 100-mile ultra marathon record. And he talks about how his training, it's like such an ego hit. Like he has to really temper it back and just let people pass him. He's used to like really striving to win every single race, but he has to just accept that, no, this is a training phase, and I'm only going at 70% of my pace, and I'm okay with that. And he says it's funny because he's laughingly saying it, but he's talking about how it's literally more of like me battling my mind than really anything else. It's like you have to be able to kind of check your ego at the door and understand that what you're doing is going to help you get to those max exertion points. But right now, if you even have some weight, maybe you have some weight to lose, maybe you're just trying to get stronger, or whatever you're trying to prove or achieve, you have to respect the process and respect your body and work smarter, not harder.
Right. Have you guys, so this is an interesting topic. So are you familiar with who Amelia Boone is? So she has won like a bunch of the world. I think it's called the world's toughest mudder. It's like one of the hardest races. It's like an ultra endurance, like obstacle course race, but it's like a 24-hour race, and it's like unpredictable. They may like be doing, it's extreme endurance with obstacles. So essentially, she's won outright, like I think like three or so times, 3 or 4 times, like beating all the men as well. And what there's this kind of notion out there that I've seen come up a couple times, which is that generally speaking, when it comes to his strength and power and endurance, it's like men are physically more dominant over women. But when it comes to ultra endurance and like extreme aerobic capacity, the scale kind of tips back to balanced, with men and women being able, like women almost being able to handle more on the ultra endurance side and be able to go longer at a higher rate than men. Yeah, I've read this a couple times and I've heard it on several podcasts, one being the one she was on. She talked about it a little bit, which I thought was really interesting. So when it comes down to like ultra distance, women are essentially just as fast as men, or can compete with men when the longer something goes. I thought that was really fascinating. Have you guys heard anything along those lines, or?
No, I feel like I've heard something like that before, but yeah, I wouldn't have any reason why. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know the mechanism behind it. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of speculation.
I'll give you my speculation.
No sexist comments. No, I'm just...
No, not a sexist comment. I was gonna say because a lot of men are just stupid idiots just want to pump iron and add muscle, and then all of a sudden, they added a bunch of weight onto the car but didn't update the motor. So what do you expect?
Well, my yeah, my thoughts would be like more along the lines of more the evolutionary process of women being childbearing and being able to take on greater amounts of pain than men and being able to bear more pain. Because obviously, if you're doing an ultramarathon, it's going to friggin' hurt. Like it's going to hurt. There's going to be a lot of pain involved that you got to push through. You guys listen to David Goggins and how he talked about doing a 24-hour race. Like there's no way around it. You're running that long, it hurts. Like it's going to hurt really bad. And so maybe that's what it comes down to is the women are capable of enduring more pain for that sustained amount of time. I don't know.
No, you're onto something, because Peter Attia talks about it too, and he talks about how we have two different ways that people can be really efficient. They can either have a high threshold for that pain when that hydrogen builds up in the muscle, or they can have just such a fast rate of lactate production that they can clean it out and it never gets above whatever a certain point. But he did mention something about females having a higher pain tolerance to that fatigue. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's cool that it's verified by Peter Attia. He's a smart dude.
Yeah, absolutely. What about like body composition? Like men naturally are supposed to have less fat than women. Women will have more, whether it's childbearing cause. Like I think possibly like the metabolic processes could run a little bit different for them than us. Because if we're more say we're more glycomimetic driven for the male sex, then the females must counterbalance somehow. We're not the same genetic. Well, we are genetically similar, but we're not. Processes can be completely different, and if they're more fat adapted with different hormones, their system's going to run a lot different than ours. And I can completely see where we have more power and short, and they can sustain that. I think there's a lot to that.
So they're more fat adaptive, you think, already?
Yeah. It's probably a trade-off. We can lift, most guys can lift pretty strong weights, and most average women aren't going to come close to that. So there's got to be that trade-off where we have an energy system dominant over over them. Like think thousands of years ago, were they really were they hunting and chasing stuff down in short periods, or were they more gathering like sustained longer distance? Well, I can't tell you what the right answer is, but I'm just speculating.
Well, a pregnant woman for 9 months is going to have elevated heart rates, elevated metabolism. I mean, you could almost say that is a minimal amount of consistent stress on the body, that it's using the oxidative system the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, not all women. Well, no, but not all women, go through that experience, and a lot of them do a lot of these events and races and ultra endurance races prior to. Most probably do them prior to childbearing. I would guess. I'm not.
True, true. But without having to go through that, I just meant like their bodies are just more prepared for that because of that. Well, I just want to let everybody know that I'm going to put all this stuff in the show notes. I'm going to put the articles about what Mike was talking about and what I was talking about. And then I'm going to put in the residual training effect, Amelia Boone, and Peter Attia, links to some resources to read about both those, so that you guys can dive into a little bit further if you want to. Otherwise, feel free to write us an email, and it's thinkfitnesslife@gmail.com.
Favorite energy system? Oh, um, well, I can tell you that which isn't my favorite, aerobic. No, well, let's just say I don't, I take the Mike Boyle approach. I don't focus on purely doing aerobic training with my workouts. Aerobic effect is a result of my workout, um, if that makes sense. So I do tend to cut my rest periods short. And part of that is to what I'm working out for right now. Like the main thing I'm trying to get better at is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And so you're going 5 minute rounds with a 1 minute break. And like today, my training was like, I think I did 5 rounds of 5 minute rounds with a 1 minute break. And, one round I went with a guy who weighed 295 pounds. So imagine him on top of your chest. Like, so you don't rest. So when I'm doing weight training and putting that stress on my body, which is similar to the stress I'm going to face in a rolling session. I'm trying to rest the least amount of between exercises as possible. I may be lifting pretty heavy. I may be doing, 5, 6 reps. So a lot of it is like strength endurance. And so there's an underlying aerobic effect going on. I'm not training it specifically, but I like strength. I like that 3 to 5 rep range. I like training for strength and, anaerobic, maybe a little bit of alactic, power. Sometimes I'm doing 10-second sprints on an Airdyne, but the majority of where I'm at is that anaerobic, glycolytic. That's where I like to live.
I can agree. I'm phosphagen system. That's where I thrive. I love that one. You know, power, explosiveness, and then shut it down. But unfortunately, you gotta train the other ones, and you gotta increase the hydrogen and feel the suck.
Yeah, and that's one thing too. Like we didn't talk about this, but you rob Peter to pay Paul. So like if you are going to start doing more high explosive power stuff, focusing on your alactic system, phosphagen system, you're going to sacrifice aerobic capacity, and vice versa. If you're a marathon runner, you're going to sacrifice strength and power. Like it's just the name of the game. It's the law of specificity, and your training essentially dictate what type of result is in effect.
Yeah, and that's why you, Mike, can't be Mr. Flash, or Mr. Flash can't exist in this world because that's just the human body doesn't exist like that. And people wonder why like Olympians are so good, but they can't be good at other sports or other. I mean, we're talking completely different energy systems demands.
Well, this is why the decathletes are so impressive to me. Like the guys who can do 10 events over 2 days, of endurance, speed, power, like be able to throw a javelin, be able to do a long jump, and then be able to, what are some of the other events they do? Um, like what are the endurance ones they do? Don't they have to do a marathon or a mile, at least a mile run? Um, I thought there's a marathon, but yeah, but I mean that those guys are extremely impressive athletes. They are the true jack of all trades. I think like you've got your CrossFit athletes who like Matt Frazier and some of these guys who can do some remarkable things, but they look like bodybuilders. Like these decathletes look like athletes. Like they look like a true athlete. Like they're not huge, muscular, but they can sustain. They can output power. They can be strong if they need to, and I would just call them like a relative, like a perfect, like not an absolute athlete, but like a perfect relative athlete. You know,
Because if say you took one of those, and it could be, say, let's take a javelin thrower from a decathlon. Do you think that they would be up in the world class with just a strictly like world class Olympian javelin thrower? Like, how do you think they would compare? Do you think their power would be a little less?
yeah, definitely a little less, but it's going to be close. Yeah, it's going to be close, but it's going to be lower.
Oh yeah, close. But that's where that specificity is so cool because like you have these athletes that can do like 10 events and crush it, but they won't be the number one in any single one of those events.
Speaking of, while you mentioned the javelin, I was listening to Joe Rogan podcast with John Donaher, who is MMA coach who does like he specializes in leg locks. He talked about the javelin throw is the most explosive movement in all of sports. It's literally, yeah. Well, think about what it is. It's a full sprint, right? It's a full sprint into throwing something through your spiral line, like with as much kinetic energy as you can possibly output. Like that throw is extremely explosive, and you're running a full sprint before you chuck something as hard as you can with that kind of spiral effect. He's like, it's the most explosive event in any sport on earth.
That's just like it's like pure human movement of spiralization. Just
Yeah, it's pure power out. It's like that is like the most kinetic power you can produce. Is a javelin throw.
so you're saying that now gyms should have javelin throw machines because it's the most efficient power. But can you imagine that if it was a machine that you could replicate that, you would have like the outputs of energy demand and systems would be so cool.
Well, how about you ever been to a bar that had one of those punching bag things that you can hit and it kind of pops up into the top like when you hit it, and then it gives you like a PSI score. Well, they took them out of bars now because they just start fights now, but yeah, essentially like it was one of those where like you stand back 10 feet, you kind of You run up to it, kind of crow hop, and then just slam it with as much kinetic energy as possible through this like big like haymaker. And you can put so much more into a punch when you can run up to it and do that. Like think, okay, Happy Gilmore, right? I've never tried to do that because it's extremely precise on how you have to hit a golf ball with it's like such a small room for error with something like that. But like that's another example of you know how you can produce that much power because you're moving into it. You're not moving from a static position. And I mean I see that javelin. I'm like I never thought of it until he said it. But I was like, you know what? I can't think of any other sport or any other type of movement in any sport that is that explosive as a javelin throw. There really isn't one.
At Top Golf, they have a big sign that says "No running up to the tee." Like, oh yeah, exactly. And especially when there's alcohol involved, like it's just bad news bears. Someone's gonna just fall off, like continue to run, trip, and then just fall off the ledge.
But if you could master that like Happy Gilmore did, you would see exponential results on a drive. 100%. You're getting, yeah. It's just, will it ever break into the pros or the PGA? Probably not because it's not accepted. But if you master it,
Oh, guaranteed. There's we could YouTube it right now. There's people out there who are doing it. Again, you're right. They're a specialist. They may win long drive competitions, but they're not gonna make it on the tour. Because like the tour, you need to be a decathlete. You need to be good at driving. You need to be good at hitting your irons, and you need to be good at putting. You need to you've got to have all three energy systems essentially. So
But no, but it's a good analogy for um, decathlon like specificity. All right, so what's your oh well, so yeah, I agree with Eric though. Answering question back to that the um, phosphagen system's my favorite, but my phosphagen system kicks me out at like 8 seconds, whereas Eric can make it the full 30 seconds. Eric can,
well, now I'm tapping into different system now. I'm going glycolytic.
yeah, but I feel like you could almost break a fan bike if you really wanted to.
Eric, what do you catch on watts on a fan bike typically? What's your max output?
If I'm going for like 10 seconds,
Yeah, I mean, what's the max watts you've ever hit?
I try to break like 15 to 1700.
Really nice.
If I'm really pushing it, yeah.
I gotta give that a whirl. I know I've hit about 12 before, 1200. I know I can probably hit higher. Now I have to hit higher after hearing what you hit.
Let's do it. Let's all record ourselves.
I'm gonna record it too. All right, here's the deal. In the next week, before we sit down and record again, you've gotta yeah have somebody film your watt meter as you're cranking away on one, and we'll all see what we can output.
Deal. Do you guys have any of those CV2 bikes yet, where they're just it's like a row machine with the bike and no handles?
No, but my buddy just got a Rogue air bike. Yes, yeah. Is it an Echo? It's yeah, it's bulky. It's very sturdy. It doesn't move, which is really nice when you're on something like that. Especially when as you know, when you're generating that much wattage. I mean, Eric, if you're doing 15, 1600 watts, that bike's sliding all over the place. Yeah, that Rogue one does not move, so I'm gonna have to jump on that and crank it up.
Yeah, I had a client like challenge me because I kept making him do 10-second sprints, and all I was doing was monitoring what his wattage was and writing it down. He took it as a challenge, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, well then what can you do?" And I was like, "Fine, I'll hop on there." And I'm in like full sweats and or like full sweatpants and just my work shirt. But man, I definitely know I hit 16, but I was just dead after that for the rest of the session.
Well, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole because I know we're short on time, but like just 1 minute here. An air bike actually is a great way to kind of gauge people's like strength or their power output or capacity, and a great way to measure it too, especially with clients or with yourself. Like for example, if you're doing anaerobic power, being able to sustain a high wattage output for 20 to 30 seconds, and then being able to remeasure that again after training it, is a great way to measure your progress and see, because watts are a great measurement of power output. So that's a great tool. That's a great exercise selection to measure those types of changes in the system.
Mike, are you living in my left brain? Are you living in my left brain? Because you literally said what I was thinking. Like, the fan bike can be used just for almost any energy system development, and you can track exactly where you need to be. And as soon as you go out of certain wattage, that energy system switches. So it's like, if you tell a client, hey, I want you to stay at 500 watts for this amount of time. If they go up and out of that, they're gonna feel themselves energy system switch. And it's like, I told you. But fan bike, great.
Yeah. Right, and vice versa. If they can't sustain like 500 watts for 30 seconds, we're gonna know that we don't have a really good anaerobic system built yet. Yeah, we need to really make sure that we're yeah. It's a great tool. It's such a great tool. Everybody should find one, and I don't suggest spending $1,000 and putting one in your house, but I found Schwinn air bikes on Airdynes on Facebook Marketplace, like used ones just locally around here for like $600, lightly used. Yeah. So
I agree. And one other thing I think is a good one too is measuring how many calories can be burned. Like if you pick like 20 calories or time for calories burned. So like, 20 to 50, depending on the machine. Like, all right, how quick can we burn 50 calories essentially? And like you said, kind of using that as a checkpoint to test like every couple of weeks. You can really tell if you improved your system. I guess to sum it all up, man, I don't know. I guess to sum it all up, I'd say if you're just starting, strengthen your aerobic system through the activities you want to continue to do, whether it's soccer or hiking or lifting or running or swimming. Use that as a way to get better at your aerobic system and pushing yourself, and find some sort of way of tracking where you are and seeing where you're going so that you can monitor your progress and make sure you're working out the right zones. Um, and if you're somebody who has maybe been stuck or hitting plateaus, odds are you're hovering in zone 2, zone 3 too much, and you need to kind of back off and establish contrast back into your system and do some more aerobic work, whether that be a day of just all body weight stuff and you just start shortening your rest period, or if you want to go play a pickup soccer game or something like that. Just again, kind of establishing that contrast back into your energy systems.
yeah. I'll just kind of second what you said, and just say the aerobic system is boring for most people to jump on a treadmill. Like if you're gonna join a gym to run on a treadmill for 30 minutes and that's all you're going to use it for, then save your money, go outside. But also it's just not an efficient way to use your time. You could be building your aerobic system and building movement skills at the same time. So that's how I would suggest people spend their time. Like to your point, on those recovery days, you can be working your aerobic system, which is going to be great for recovery because it's going to mobilize all those waste products that are just stagnant from your previous day workout when you're sore. And when you mobilize all that stuff, you increase your ability to buffer it. You increase your ability to improve your fat substrate usage, and then also essentially build those movement skills over time. So that could be a hot yoga class. That could be just a mobility routine where you're kind of going through some different kind of stretch flows, and then doing, like Matt said, body weight, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, squats, whatever. And then just really just moving exercise to exercise, minimal rest, minimal load. Like don't use a ton of weight. Just keep moving, and guaranteed you'll not only feel better the next day, you'll be moving better. Your aerobic system will enhance. You'll burn more fat. I mean, there's just so many great things that come about from just doing a basic recovery workout where you're focusing on aerobic system without the boring, dull monotony of cyclic type of exercises. Yeah, exactly.
You got to push the system to develop it. That's all it is. And I think you guys summed it up pretty well right there. Biggest thing for me is once you get all that aerobic base build up, then you work at your capacity and you have to get uncomfortable. You have to go to that place where your muscles are screaming, your body's screaming. You have to get comfortable with it because that's how you're going to adapt your system even more. And once people get to that spot and they really realize it, that's where I think they excel through metabolic processes and everything else. But if you don't ever push it or get to that limit, then you're wasting your potential 100%, and you're not going to see changes.
Cool. Well, that's all, folks. See you next week on the Think Fitness Life podcast.